And of course, too, Daniel, while we've got the troubling numbers that come out today in relation to jobless data, our unemployment up. It's now at a 2-year high of 4.1%. Now, I'm not surprised. We've seen these businesses collapsing, particularly in construction. And we've got this ever-increasing migration rate. This is what concerns me.
Well, you're spot on, Peter. At the same time as unemployment is going up, this government remains even more committed to a dramatic expansion of our migration program. They remain committed to their record 1.7 million migration intake over the next 5 years. Now, that's the equivalent to the entire population of South Australia. That comes on the back of record intake of 500,000 last financial year, which is the highest on record by a significant margin. You've got to go back to 2008 when the intake was around 300,000, and even that was dramatically higher than long-run historical averages. And so the issue here is, of course, we want to welcome more migrants to our nation. They've been a critical part of our national economic and social fabric for decades. But this is completely unplanned for when you look at the pressure on schools, roads, hospitals, housing, and other critical social and economic amenities. And now, as you rightly point out, in the context of growing unemployment, once again, it appears that the government doesn't have a plan for how to manage this mass migration intake, and it's fundamentally out of step with basic community expectations.
So, if I said before, all the best to the Prime Minister and his girlfriend today on news of their engagement. But if you listen to the headlines, listen to other news programs, the world's basically stopped. That's all they were talking about. And I kept thinking to myself, if I was back as a Chief of Staff to a Prime Minister, I would find this a bit of a challenge managing a pending nuptials, because even if he was to pay for it out of his own pocket, which he should, Australians have still not got to copy him using the Lodge or Kirribilli House for a wedding reception for all his Labor mates. I mean, he's got to tread carefully here. There's a lot of goodwill today, but these are public assets, these homes.
Oh, Peter, like yourself, of course, we wish the Prime Minister and his fiancée all the very best. I'm sure everyone does. But when it comes to footing the bill, let's wait and see. And let's wait and see actually where it is held and when all the details come out. I mean, perhaps he could do a Boris Johnson and have a private wedding with, 30-odd people, make it a small affair. Perhaps he wants something more lavish. It is Jodie Hayden's first marriage. It's Mr Albanese's second. But when it comes to the cost and the location, I think he has to be careful. And also with the guest list, that's going to be a tricky scenario he's got to deal with.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it all happens. $450 million, we know, Daniel, they spent on the failed Voice referendum, $4 million on VIP flights around the country. Now Labor are going to spend $40 million to sell in these stage 3 tax cuts. Now, they said a few weeks ago they weren't even on the cards. We know, of course, they were on the cards. We find that out today, that back on December 11, Treasury officials and the Treasurer were already working them up. But I tell you what, we're all going to get these tax cuts come in on the 1st of July. We don't have to apply for them. They're not something we need to learn about. So why do they even need to be advertised? Why spend $40 million on something that's going to land in our pocket anyway?
Well, that's right, Peter. I mean, this has always been political, and the evidence for that is growing by the day as the Treasury Secretary is before the Senate committee basically saying, confirming the timing and the nature of the questions and advice that was put to him by the Treasurer, and now this spending campaign. So, look, the issue here the government has is that the broken promise looks political, and now they're backing it in with, publicly funded advertising. And I think this gets to a much bigger issue as well, Peter, that we've been discussing the last couple of weeks. I mean, these tax cuts are one very small part of a bigger cost of living challenge. And so far, the government has not put forward any meaningful policy to deal with the drivers of the cost of living issues. We've just talked about migration as a key driver. You've got inflation being underpinned by government spending, and you just gave a very important outline of the NDIS as one example of that. So until Australians have their political leaders addressing the causes of cost of living, any tax relief is going to be quickly swallowed up by price rises.
Hey, I'm just about out of time, and I've got to ask you as Victorian. I mean, headlines today everywhere are saying industry big employers, they're going to leave Victoria because they cannot get certainty of power supply.
Well, that's right, Peter. I mean, what's happening in Victoria, I think, is a lesson to all Australians about what happens when you have bad public policy decisions that are being made. We know that businesses are fleeing the state. Victoria is the only state in the nation to have a net outflow of businesses. And this was always going to happen when you look at the energy policy. It's not just the IPA and yourself talking about this. The Australian Energy Market Operator for months has been warning that blackouts were a possibility in Victoria this summer and next summer. Now that's a reality, that 500,000 Victorians were plunged into darkness. And the key issue here, Peter, is the political leaders in Victoria, and it has to be said on both sides of politics here in Victoria, do not have reliability and affordability as the centrepiece of their energy policy. Instead, it's all about reducing emissions. And until there is a focus on the security of our energy system, I'm concerned that these problems are only going to get much worse.
I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, both of you, for your time.